Hello and welcome to Cannabis TV. This weekend saw tens of thousands of individuals showing solidarity by protesting in Glasgow against government and large corporations who are annually destroying the planet by engaging with extremely harmful and unsustainable industrial practices. Over at St Luke's, also in Glasgow, Beyond Green, an annual hemp fringe festival, featured a whole host of cannabis-related companies and speakers showing that cannabis is able to fill the gap needed for sustainable agriculture, improving industrial practices, and increasing overall human well-being. The following talk, which features leading members of the cannabis industry, details challenges and obstacles in the way of achieving a more cannabis-centric planet. I hope you enjoy it.
So today we're going to introduce you to the most amazing plant. We're all massive lovers of this plant, and we really see this plant as a viable solution to the climate crisis, and really feel that the government now needs to recognise this plant as a solution to some of the promises that they've been making around net zero and deforestation and cleaning our seas and our air. So I'm Rebekah Shaman. I'm Managing Director of the British Hemp Alliance. We are working to lobby government to remove the legislation and restrictions that are stopping a cannabis industry from thriving. We have three points that we want the government to change in order to free this plant from its political shackles. And if you want to know more, please come to and visit our stand over there. We want farmers to be able to utilise the whole plant. We want to have 1% THC in the field, and we want the plant to be recognised as an agricultural crop, be taken out of the Home Office and put back into DEFRA. So three very easy demands to the government that they could easily change to help us. But I'm joined here today with three really amazing people in the industry, really doing great things, and feel very honoured to be on the stage with them. So to my left we have Bartley of Unyte Hemp, who is really at the forefront of growing hemp here in the UK, and also really pushing the environmental agenda with hemp, physically, not only by planting the hemp, but also looking at ways of processing it, which is really one of the most important things that we need to be looking at, how to get investment for processing. To my right is Esplin, who is the chair of the Scottish Hemp Association, is doing amazing things in Scotland, has inspired really so many farmers to grow hemp here in Scotland, is actually, almost single-handedly starting the hemp renaissance here in Scotland, and is doing a documentary at the moment with the director of the Hemp Road Trip to really push the story and the importance of hemp and cannabis. And next to Kyle, we have Vicki Hatcher from Green Keen magazine. She's doing amazing things, getting it out through the media channels to really promote and tell the story of hemp and the importance of hemp for our health and well-being. And when I say hemp, I mean cannabis, the whole plant. But when we mention hemp, it's the 0.2% THC cannabis. So to make the difference between when we say cannabis, is the flower and the leaf that you consume medicinally, and when we call it hemp, it's really the agricultural crop that we're using for biomass, for energy, for concrete, industrial uses. Just to give you an understanding of the difference between the way we talk about this plant, because this plant is amazing for so many different things, and I think that's been one of the big issues around it, is how do we actually understand this amazing plant. So I hope by the end of this talk you'll know a lot more about it, get inspired and get involved. I also like to do a big up to Sam Cannon, who has really been the player behind all of this. He has brought their cannabis story to COP26, set up this Hemp Fringe Festival with music, and also our sponsor Melinda from Future for Humanity. Thanks to her, we've been able to put this on, to be able to offer you this space to really understand more about this amazing plant. So, before I begin how to avoid a climate crisis, I think I will start with Jamie. Do we avoid a climate crisis?
Thanks, Rebekah, and thanks everyone for coming along today and listening to some of the solutions that we can provide with cannabis sativa, which is hemp. I mean, I'm going to start with just going over a couple of the big impacts and the rationale of why hemp, if you like. So there's two main things that I really relate to why hemp can be such a solution to climate change and to the multiple problems we're facing. One is its ability to sequester carbon, and that means we've got carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I'm sure everyone's heard that obviously one of the issues with climate change is we've got too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and industrial hemp can sequester 20 times more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than the same size area of rainforest. So if we just put that in perspective for a minute, people are concerned about cutting down the rainforest. Absolutely, we need to stop that. Massive impact on carbon, also massive impact on biodiversity. But 20 times less area of hemp cultivated, and bear in mind we can grow this crop in an agricultural crop rotation. So it will grow on a farmer's field. We've got 4.9 million arable acres of land in the UK. So we can grow hemp in a rotation, not all the time on all those acres, we need to grow food. But what hemp also does is improve the following crop yields and gives us more food. So it can sequester carbon, it can remove pollutants out of the soil and then increase the following crop yields. So it doesn't compete with food security, it improves it. And the other main big win with hemp is its biomass production, as Rebekah's touched on there. So it will produce 4 times the biomass that forestry will in just 4 months. So again, we can grow 4 times less hemp to produce the same amount of biomass. And the UK government talks about insulation. I mean, we're very focused initially on construction products because we, at Unyte Hemp, we really feel those are a big sector that we can have a large impact with. And it's an industry that's going to struggle to decarbonise itself, but it has to change. And the way we do that is provide alternative products at scale. The block you can see on the table there, that's hempcrete. That's just hemp and lime mixed. That can be used to build houses. And then we don't need to quarry stone out of the ground, emit loads of carbon during those processes, build a house of it, and then crush it all into pieces and throw it back into the cycle again. Massive amounts of carbon emitted. Carbon can be embodied in those products, stored in the lifespan of the building, and that's locked up out the cycle then. And this is what we need to do. We need to remove as much carbon as possible, and hemp is a tool to do that. We can do so many different products, and if we replace the high embodied carbon alternatives, that's how we have the impact. That's how we really drive change, and ultimately revert climate change, because unless we do things at scale, we won't make the changes that are needed, and therefore we won't stop when people talk about 1.5 degrees, 2.2 degrees we're on target for at the moment. That's not enough. We need to do more than that. And the way we can do it is education, break down the barriers around legislation, and really ensure that we can utilise this as a solution that we know it needs to be, or we certainly all believe it needs to be, to really have an impact on climate change.
Great, absolutely. I mean, one of the big things is that the government in 2016 at the Paris COP20, what was it? COP, yeah, but what was it? Which one was it? COP? But which COP was it? COP, I think, no. At the Paris Climate Agreement, the government, actually Theresa May wrote into law that we were going to Britain was to become net zero by 2050. And she was one of the first political leaders to actually write this into law. And now we're in a situation where Britain really needs to be a leader to that. We really need to hold our politicians accountable to the promises that they make, because we've all become very complacent here. And we're hearing all these pledges. So, Boris Johnson now wants to pledge end of deforestation by 2030. What does that mean? What's the pledge? What's an agreement? What's a pledge? We want to see commitment, and cannabis is a fantastic, viable solution to start putting some of these changes into place, some of these solutions into place. So, Kyle, what do you think about it?
Making changes.
Making changes.
So, one of the things, my name is Kyle Esplin, I'm chair of the Scottish Hemp Association. especially over this last year, I've got very involved in the scene on regulatory front in Scotland and across the UK, reaching out to connect with other UK groups. And one of the things that sort of come to my attention to work on, try and make changes, where all the benefits are known and it's still action is not taken. And that goes from the government level down to the individuals, to the farmers who've known of the benefits for some time but haven't grown hemp. And it seems the stigma is the biggest problem in that. We all know the licensing is inconvenient, but the stigma seems to be a big issue to make change there. I've been connecting with officials in the Scottish Government and the Crops Department, and the story is the same. They're aware of the benefits, they look over the data, we send it in, and yeah, you know, there's not a direct actionable point that is coming from the top down. So really, like this whole industry has been, it's been always driven by the grassroots, the people on the ground. And what's been going on here in Scotland is I reached out last year to some farmers to get them involved in growing hemp, see if they'd be interested. We can only grow for seed and the fibre here in Scotland, we can't use the leaf and the flower. But now that we've got started with that, the farmers are a great point of leverage with the MP. And the MP, he's taken a lot more notice hearing from the farmers than he is from CBD companies, for example, let's say. So, as it turns out, I'm up in Angus, and it caught my MP's attention when we went from having no hemp farms to 7 hemp farms in Angus. And he was like, what's going on here? What's all this hemp production about? And we've had all the fields, and the police have had regular calls. All the people are walking in the countryside, think they've discovered a massive grow that's going on. So now everyone's well informed that we've got industrial hemp production going on in Angus. We've got over that little hurdle. The farmers were very hesitant to get on board, and the thing that helped one of them start would be if they heard a neighbour was possibly interested. And now that we have them growing, the interest is just, it's crazy. We're getting phone calls all the time of so many farmers who want to get involved. One of the things that's been holding it back as well is the practicalities for the processing, because hemp has been so sidelined for so long in our culture. We don't have the decortication facility. So up there in Angus and Aberdeenshire, where we're growing a lot of hemp, we don't have a processing facility to do decortication, to turn it into all the industrial uses, make it into hemp clothing, things like this. The nearest facility, there's one down near the border, there's another down in Yorkshire. It's not economically viable to be trucking hemp stocks up and down the country. But the fact we got the farm started, that's one step closer to getting the facility in the area. So we've got that, we feel we've got that well underway and moving along. It's not coming from the top down, but from the grassroots up and making change. We're also looking for ways to, how to cut through to the people who are not already on board with this, or the people who listen to the information and ignore it, or don't take action. We can't just dismiss them and take a biased perspective and just look at the people who listen to our information. So one of the angles I've been promoting is on the biodiversity front for hemp. Hemp is the best crop really there is out there for biodiversity and helping the bees. A lot of people don't know about this. The reason I bring up the bees is that the bees, they get like over 1 million signatures on a petition. Like, I mean, within 24 hours, everyone gives a petition for the bees. So there's been so many studies done on the benefits of hemp fields for bees that we're not hearing about. And I've been telling farmers about this, telling our agricultural services in the area. And basically, where bees have access to hemp, it's a late flowering source of protein in the season. And there could be around a third of them more could survive the winter. There's also been studies done in Poland where they've tested CBD extract on bees which were exposed to pesticides or pesticides without being exposed to CBD. And the ones that were exposed to CBD had the same lifespan as the bees that weren't exposed to pesticides. So the CBD seemed to be offsetting a lot of the problems that the bees have been having. On one of the specifics, to get into the details of it, that we all know about the issues with the herbicides and the pesticides that are widely used and abused in the industrial agricultural system, and that needs to change. And we shouldn't be to use those chemicals when we get hemp into the system. And we've heard of chemical suppliers telling everyone that the trials have been done, there's no evidence that the bees are being killed by this. But there's plenty of evidence of things like their gut microbiome is being stripped out and their immune system is being damaged and their health is being damaged and they're not surviving. Having access to hemp is shown to improve the health of bees and the knock-on effects in the chain of biodiversity, I think we can't fully appreciate. So that's a great angle to get on board and want to get the mainstream on. So we're really proud to get the hemp farmers started again in Scotland, and say it wasn't easy really to convince the farmers, and there was a lot of Zoom calls and there's a lot of apprehension and hesitation, but now it's started. There's been really good progress in the last year. There's been a lot more interest, and the Scottish Government is also now taking notice that the farmers are growing it because they're demanding the change. If the farmers in Europe can have the processing facility and sell the leaf and the flower and everything else, why can't they do that here? So I believe that's a good step we've got on the way here.
And that's such an amazing point to bring in, because obviously the climate crisis affects every area of our existence. And if we lose bees, we're in big trouble on planet Earth. So the fact that CBD is fantastic not only for humans, but for all animals that live on this planet too, including the bees. I mean, this is really an important, how to avoid a climate crisis, feed the bees CBD. I love that.
Just give them access to hemp fields, that's it.
Yeah, and actually there's amazing hemp CBD honey. So of course, if you have bees utilising the hemp, you get amazing CBD extracted honey, which is really absolutely delicious and actually super beneficial for human health and well-being. And while we're in this situation with coronavirus, actually immunity is a really important thing to boost. So CBD becomes an incredibly important part of the narrative, and moving towards the narrative is what's really important. And Kyle touched on the fact that we need to change the narrative around cannabis in order to change the perspective that's been kind of brainwashed since the 1930s. So, and this is a perfect time to bring in Vicky, who is dedicated her life to changing the narrative. So tell us more. How to avoid a climate crisis, changing the narrative.
Wow, where do you start with such a complex story? And this is where the magazine became birthed. There's so many facets to learning and educating people about hemp and cannabis and medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis, and we could spend, we are spending 3 days talking about it, and we could continue, and it's constantly changing. This isn't a subject that there's one person in the world that knows all the answers. It's quite the opposite. The patients and the users and the farmers and the people who are on the ground, the grassroots, are the people that actually know how to work with this plant, how to utilise this plant. And we're talking about the most versatile plant in the world. Not only can it be used once it's grown in a multitude of different ways to make basically everything that's made out of petrochemicals and plastic, we could have made out of hemp. And the past 100 years, all of this innovation and development has been hindered by legislation. And one of the things that we talk about quite often is that it's not recognised by DEFRA. So hemp isn't underneath the agricultural, it's not recognised as a plant. It's almost on the same level as a gun licence, isn't it? It's like the level of licensing that's needed to plant a plant is ridiculous. And it makes us ask, where would we be if we hadn't had 100 years of being held back of what this plant can actually do? And our mission with the magazine is to tell these stories in an educational, fun way, so we can educate through entertainment, because lots of us don't know what to do, and that is through the stigma is in all areas of industry, like the government bodies, the nurses, the doctors, the farmers, everybody's got. It's a really tricky place to negate, and everybody here will know that it's not, there's nothing to compare it to. It's like you're making your own path, because this is so new. And I think if we really recognise that there is a crisis happening now, and it's not just about money, and we're actually trying to solve the problem of these environmental issues we've got, why are we not looking at hemp? Why is it not the first thing we're looking at, let alone like, well, why have we got to have something in the corner? Go, no, what about this plant? It's almost like we forgot that we're part of nature. Nature has given us the solution in our hands. We've devastated the environment, the air, the land, the topsoil, our societies, our relationships, our bodies, everything's in a bit of a mess, you know. And the planet has gone, here's the plan that will fix all of it. And we go, oh, can we just make some more money off it? Can we just rinse it a little bit more? And make it a bit more difficult to access? And it makes you beg the question, do they really want a solution? Because if they did, why are they not picking up hemp first on a global scale? And it's so easy. I mean, the beauty, Jamie will concur with this, is this plant doesn't need the support that many of the plant needs. It doesn't need pesticides, it doesn't need to. And Jamie's talking about agricultural land. What about the land that is completely unusable? What about the contaminated land? What about the side of the roads and the train tracks and the M25 and these places that aren't industrial land and have no other use? Why aren't we planting it there? And even if we don't use it, even if you just burn it and set it on fire and it carbonises and goes back to the earth, this plant is a miracle plant. Not only does it grow faster than any other plant, as it grows, it can go up to 20 feet tall, and the tap root goes down 20 feet as well. And as it draws up the water, it draws up all the minerals and re-nourishes the topsoil, remineralises, because that's another environmental disaster that's in the wings, is our topsoil is devastated because we've been using harsh glyphosate and other really harsh heavy metal pesticides, and there's been no remedial aspect to this. So all of these pesticides are built up in our waterways, in our soil. It's like the problem isn't just one problem, there's so many problems, and hemp just solves them all simultaneously, effortlessly. So if it could do all of these things, it's our mission to try and spoon feed what this plant can do to a bigger audience as possible, because, okay, smoking weed and patient recreational, it can be a little bit touchy, but hemp, common sense, there's no one who look at this plant and go, why are we not planting this and learning about it and researching it and developing it? So it's our mission to talk about this, and it's one of the reasons why it was so important to come here, because this is the unfolding of the future for our children, and we know there's a problem. So what are the next 10 years going to look like? What are the next 20 years going to look like? And personally, and I'm sure that we all feel the same, is I don't see anything that's even next to hemp, let alone comparable. Hemp is the only thing we've got on the table that can actually fix these problems. So anything that we can do to tell this story from as many different facets as possible, so we can have that penny dropping moment with everybody who needs it, whether it's in a personal or a company or a corporation or a government, everybody needs to wake up to the potential of this plant. So that's our mission, and also building celebrities in our own industry. So everybody on the stage here has done so much good work. We want to celebrate that, and we feel that it's important to have these grassroots represented before it becomes corporatised. And when you look in places where it is legal and more accessible, it's just been taken over by investment bank managers and hedge fund managers, and it's almost like we've got the solution and we just want to rinse that as well. And it's like, if we've not learned our lesson, the problem that we're in at the moment is we've forgot that we're the caretakers. We need to take care of this land because it takes care of us, and we've just we've separated ourselves from nature. And I think hemp and cannabis in its entirety will be what brings us back to remember that our role here is to look after each other and the land, and it's a symbiotic relationship. We can't just keep taking and taking without giving something back.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Brilliant. And so I kind of communed with Aunt and said, prohibition, like what happens? I mean, who prohibits a plant, makes it illegal to grow a plant that comes from Mother Earth, and not only that, but a plant that is our best friend in the plant world. I mean, you have to have some kind of weird understanding of our relationship with nature if you ban a plant. But actually, the message I got back was, by going underground, it didn't become corporatized. In that, had it become massively corporatized, which is where it was going in the 1930s, we would now be seeing huge companies taking the cream from the cannabis plant, and actually most of us would only be getting the dribbles down, but by having it prohibited, it means it's probably the last free plant on the planet, which means that Monsanto doesn't own it, AgriCorps don't own it, actually the people own this plant. And this is why grassroots it's a grassroots plant. And they banned it also because it represented freedom. After the war, marijuana, cannabis represented a freedom, a liberation, and it is a freedom liberation plant. It has that energy around it. And so we need to keep it free and liberated for the people, and we have to have ownership over it. If we let it become corporatized and commoditized, and suddenly the legislation changes so only the top of the pyramid benefits, then those years of prohibition would have been completely a waste of time. But now we have a real potential here in the UK, and because it's so small, actually we have a much better chance of making it work than maybe in what's happening in America, where it's just so diverse. Here, if we get the legislation right, that really benefits the circular economies, the bioeconomies, the local economies, the farmers, then we can really see a thriving green economy being ignited by hemp and really avoid this climate crisis that we are moving into. So does anyone have anything that they want to add to that?
I'd like to. I'm a holistic therapist. By practice, I'm a holistic therapist, and it's a really interesting way to look at things because it's trying to identify the cause of the problem and not constantly trying to deal with the symptom. And as we mentioned about the prohibition from the 30s, can we just imagine for a moment what it would look like now if we'd have reached to hemp instead of oil and petrochemicals? What would we avoid? Not only like the oil spills and the damage to the environment and all the mining, but what about all the plastic in the seas? That'd be hemp. It'd be absorbed back into the land once it's finished being used. All the chemicals and the petrochemicals, a lot of pharmaceuticals are oil based. This plant could have done all of the things that we're now seeing, we're trying to resolve the issues from. And how do we take the plastic out of the ocean? How do we do this? How do we deal with the microplastic? How do we deal with the rundown of all these toxic chemicals that have made their way into all the rivers and streams in worldwide? And let's imagine what that world would look like, because if we can imagine it, we can bring it in and we can make this happen, because this plan will solve all of those issues, but we need to fix the ones that we've made, and there's nothing on the table that has got a solution that's even close to hemp. And that's with 100 years of not being able to be researched and developed. So if we can push this and use this and pay, choose these products that pay a little bit more, but get the products that do last for a lifetime and aren't going to have this negative footprint. And it's like, we've got to be mindful of this stuff, because everything's cheap and wrapped in plastic, and it's all horrible and it's being thrown away. My friend did a talk a couple of years ago. He says, one of the biggest things that we've been conned about is that there's a bin. There's no such thing as a bin. You just take my rubbish somewhere else. There's no such thing as a bin. We need to rethink our waste. We need to rethink our cycles, because it's a systemic issue. It's not a one problem. And for me, the reason why the government can't get it is because they're constantly trying to compartmentalise it. They're going, oh, is it pharmaceutical? Does it fit in that group? Is it alcohol? Does it fit in that group? It doesn't fit in any of the groups. It's making its own rules. This plan is like a subject in its own right. There's nothing that compares to it. There's nothing that is accessible and easy to use and has as much application. So why are we not screaming from the rooftops, plant hemp? Why are we not just doing it? Why are we not just going, you know what, actually, we're going to do it, we're just going to disrupt it, we don't have to ask for it back. It was never yours to take. It's ours, it's our plant, and we want to be able to use it and utilise it. And instead of asking for it and begging the government, excuse me, I've got a bad back, is it all right for me to plant this in my garden? Like, no, it's ours, we've got to take it back. And that's my stance on, like, we've got to disrupt, we've got to be educational, we've got to push this into people's minds of, like, stigma is real, and it's bizarre in how it turns up in life. How has this happened? How have we lost our common sense to not be able to look at something so clearly simply the best solution you've got, why is it still deep? Why is it like this little tiny tent? Why are we not like at the biggest stage going plant it now, and everyone's going, yeah, great idea. Why is it, what do we have to do to penetrate the mainstream? Actually, what do we have to do to penetrate the mainstream? Kyle?
Well, that's exactly that's what we're trying to work on. Okay. Let me bring up a couple angles. And this, again, rather than just preaching to the choir, the ones who are...
Cannabis prevents cancer.
Yeah, well, that's another problem, the pharmaceutical companies here, but getting on board with hemp. So, we know about all these benefits, and a lot of the farmers who I got growing hemp knew about the benefits previously. They knew they could grow hemp, they didn't get the license, they wondered what would the neighbours think, and problems like this, they weren't getting on board with it. And one thing I would like to share with you, which I would say to the cannabis community would find quite amusing, that this was a point of leverage to the farmers to really convince them to get into hemp. So allow me to explain what was a big point in our local farmer's story on their journey to hemp. So they knew about the benefits. They heard there was a £650 million CBD industry in the UK. They thought there could be some money available. But I've gone off my point here. But
do you think finance is one of the main reasons?
It's a stigma in the picture. So what I'm trying to say is, when I got the farmers on board and reached out and had the conversation with them, it really surprised me to hear them say that an influential point in their journey was when they saw British Sugar on BBC Country File at dinner time growing GW Pharmaceuticals CBD plants. Now that wasn't hemp, and that wasn't hemp they were growing there for industrial use. This was for CBD production for medicinal use. But the way it was reported on BBC, Country File, dinner time, British Sugar, we could get into that, and the neighbours might not think there's something too sidelined or we're a bunch of hippies for doing this. Literally, that was a big thing with the farmers. Well, whatever the issue is there. And then another point, we all know there's troubles with the soils, and this is something that I've observed this year. It's been concerning in some ways. Like we've had some fields who are really good, really successful, and there's been a few that have had some problems. And it's from the soils, from what they've been doing to it previously, all the previous treatments, and the industrial use. And one thing that I genuinely believe fits into the story of how we can help make change, and like we can tell all the benefits about the industrial use and there isn't the uptake. I really think how the CBD industry has done a great job of not only the introduction of the details of hemp, but on a neurochemical level, there's over 10% of the adult population in the UK has been consuming some cannabinoids regular that they weren't previously. And you can look back over the evolution of the cannabinoid receptor system, which goes back 600 million years. And the best way it does many wonderful things, as we all know, but one thing that seems overlooked is as a feedback mechanism of our interaction with our environment. And this has actually been shown all the way down to like the parasitic helmet worm, which has no conscious thinking ability, and its regulation, its interaction with the environment is controlled by cannabinoid signaling, produced by cannabinoids of its own or from the host. Now it is no conceptual thought, and as we have evolved through time, cannabinoid signaling has been there through the eat, sleep, forget, protect, and this is the detail about where cannabinoids fit into the memory part. Everyone knows the jokes about the short-term memory involved with cannabinoid consumption. But
So how do you feel is the best way to get them into the
this is the thing. So we've got
quick Pakistan.
Well, this is the thing. They're getting into consuming cannabinoids, and that's hopefully going to change their behaviour. Because Okay, let me tell you this. We've got a farmer.
Quick answer, we've got the other side.
Farmer's growing hemp. His brother is operating the combine harvester. They're growing 10 acres of hemp. He comes back and he says, well, that took me 5.5 hours to cut. I had to stop, I had to change the cutting blades 3 times. It jammed the harvester. That was a lot of work. If it was barley, it would have been done in 2. If it was up to me, plant more barley next year. So how do you get past that when he knows all the benefits? And I genuinely believe that the cannabinoid consumption that has been sneaked in through the CBD supply, and it's in the hemp seed oil once they start growing it and eating their own produce, will hopefully upgrade their interaction with the environment. Because on the other side, the pesticides have been shown to negatively affect cannabinoid receptor signaling. So this could be a thing.
Actually, that's very interesting, because I planted hemp in 2007, 2008. And it was used, Hempcore were the main producers of hemp for hempcrete, and it was happening, but it hadn't had any media coverage, no one really knew what was going on. As soon as CBD hit the market, suddenly cannabis was everywhere, and it really was the medicinal part of the plant that brought it into the mainstream. And actually now we're having a discussion about it. 10, 15 years ago, no one was talking about this. Now the discussion has moved on to the climate crisis, which is really where it needs to be going. Because if you look at the amazing environmental benefits of this plant, that is the low-hanging fruit. I mean, we can be going medicinally, but our culture isn't a medicinal culture. We are an industrial manufacturing culture, and that is how I think the government can get on board, is because of the potential around manufacturing and industrial. So what do you think, how do you see it moving forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Rebekah. I mean, I think everyone's made very valid points there. I mean, the way I try and approach it, and I suppose break down some of those barriers, is quite often, especially I've done it quite a few times with MPs and with sort of council members, etc. And I'll start talking and say, can I have 2 minutes of your time? I'd just like to talk to you about giving our farmers the ability to decarbonise their crop rotations, giving us exportable commodities that we can export to other countries, giving us job creations, levelling up socially and economically communities. And then once at the end of the conversation, they usually go, oh, this is exactly what we need, these are the solutions. And it's quite funny the look on their face when you turn around to them and go, do you want to know what I was talking about there? And they suddenly realise, usually quite embarrassingly, that they don't actually know what I was talking about. They understand all these solutions, but they don't really know what I was actually talking about. And I say, oh, I was talking about cannabis sativa oil, which is industrial hemp. But if I come over here and said to you, can I talk to you about cannabis? You'd have walked the other way. And it's breaking down and showing people that it's the solutions. And it just depends on who you're talking to. Everyone's got different touch points, passions, beliefs, desires, something that's going to interest them more than others. But hemp and cannabis can be that solution to all of them, and I think that's the key. It just needs to be presented with evidence bases behind it as well, but in a factually concise way that can't be argued. And then it will be that solution that we all know and believe it wants to be.
I mean, we do have a problem with our Prime Minister at the moment that keeps putting hemp alongside hippies. And actually what what Jamie is really doing is changing that stigma by actually having a legitimate business, and also UK Hempcrete and all the farmers up in Yorkshire who are actually creating products, businesses, contributing to the economy. And that's what we really need to show the government. That's what they're interested in: job creation, manufacturing, industrialisation. And it's utilising that narrative as an industrial crop that can help with the climate crisis, as well as creating jobs, boosting the economy. And there's a big talk around circular and bioeconomies. I'm sure all of you in COP have heard all the greenwashing, all the sound bites that are coming out, without there actually being a lot of substance behind it. And actually, when you do look at the hemp data, it is mind-blowing just how much it can help with some of the crisis, this climate crisis. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask the panel? Hold on a second, let me just get you a mic.
Hi. Does the panel think that, given recent studies coming out of America that shows the efficacy and health of low THC cannabis is greatly increased when it is over 1% THC. So when the restrictions are lifted upon it, the biomass is also increased by the compost statistic from my career, and so I'm going to try right now. So you alluded to this point, and actually there were quite a few, not necessarily contradictions, but awkward moments where, oh, hemp, oh, cannabis, oh, which part am I talking about this? And I feel that the main thing that needs to happen here is a truly open and honest dialogue about this. We're saying that there is this cultural hesitance and stigma that is perpetuated by the fact that we're still here talking about hemp and cannabis, and the medical part of it. The cannabinoid doesn't care if you're using it to get stoned or you're using it to heal an illness. The plant doesn't care if you're growing it for biomass or if it's part of human trafficking and child labour. The plant doesn't have an awareness of this, we do. And so I feel that the language and the way that we hold this conversation often creates the limitations of any further future discussion around it.
I think, as a person who constantly sees articles and about how we articulate things, I hate all of the words that refer to cannabis, marijuana, hemp. They all feel really spiky and dirty and not appropriate, and they've been like slandered for such a long time. So the green cream is actually the plant. That is the name that I want to refer to the plant as. This, like, she's come from this slutty youth and got a bad reputation, and all of a sudden she's got the potential to do marvellous things. And I think the reason why we don't know the words is the words don't exist, and that's why we don't say them correctly. So we need to create a camaraderie of learning them together. Give him his mic back. Give him the mic, Sam.
I was just going to say, since the 1750s, we have had a term for this. It's Cannabis sativa L, registered by Carl Linnaeus, and that was part of the creation of the standardization of botanical nomenclature around the world. So that when a guy found a plant that, oh, this kind of looks like this, over here and over there, but they had different languages, different cultures, different heritage, we had a standardized term for it. So there is actually a point of contention that's arriving in the UK as well as America at the minute of saying that hemp can't then be the defined point of a product, because a botanical name must be used, therefore it should be named Cannabis sativa L. So
I think one of the biggest problems is the narrative around cannabis and what it means. When you say okay, let's ask the audience. When I say cannabis, what comes to your mind? Is it a spliff? Is it smoking?
No, it's a gateway drug from heroin, isn't it?
Is it gateway
gardening drug.
Shout out, if I say cannabis, what else what does it mean to you when I say cannabis? Just shout it out. So it relates to the smoking medicinal side of it, and what we're trying to...
Sorry, you can't smoke it medicinally, that's against the law.
Okay, so, but when you say cannabis, most people are relating it to the medicinal side of the plant. And what the problem is that the government, as soon as they hear that, switch off to the industrial and environmental benefits of the plant. And 0.2% THC is low, is industrial cannabis, but much easier to communicate with governments. It's the narrative you're using for your audience. So if your audience, for example, knows this industry, then they will know the difference. But if the audience doesn't know the industry, then it helps them delineate the difference between industrial hemp that you can make things with and the medicinal side of it. It just clarifies it for people who don't know. I watched Ask the Doctor. Okay, they had a 10-minute segment on CBD, and I've been in the industry for many years, and there were 5 inaccuracies, factual inaccuracies, that the reporter got wrong in a 10-minute segment. It was like every 2 minutes he was like mucking it. She was calling it cannabis, she was calling it hemp, she was calling it CBD, she was calling it cannabinoid. I mean, it was a mess. Well, whoever was the researcher didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And it is complicated.
We deal with writers, and we get a lot of people send us stuff that's like an independent writer's like pieced together their idea of what it was. And also like agricultural departments and government bodies, and it's the confusion is across the board. The confusion is across the board.
It's because there's no standardisation. So hemp in the UK is 0.2. If we go to Switzerland, it's 1%. If we go to Italy, it's 0.6.
Yep.
There is no standardisation here. It's a colloquial term. Actually, if you look at the lineage of the root of the word to the, I think the title says how you arrive at the study of a word, but it comes through European. Thank you, I came up with that. It comes through from the European. But the actual usage when those words were used, there wasn't the arbitrary low level of 0.2% THC.
Yeah,
that's what we've always been.
Actually, point out a few things you might be pleased to hear. Something will be a surprise for some in the audience to hear about. So we'll talk about hemp being under 0.2% THC. 0.2 of what? We assume the flower, but that's not what gets tested. They test the whole big chunk of the plant. So that big chunk of the plant has greatly diluted what the level is there. The other thing is, the hemp varieties, a lot of them are really being pressured to keep the THC level down to that point. And if you allow them to escape off into the ditches for a few generations, the THC level will start to naturally rise a bit and rebalance out. And then another thing, which is fact, and I completely agree with you, simply really on this, the hemp cannabis thing gets confusing because we use hemp solely to describe industrial hemp, but then we use hemp to describe cannabinoid producing plants for CBD, which are not really the industrial fibrous varieties, and there lies a confusion. It's all cannabis sativa, and you're saying it should be called that. Well, something that's a surprise to a lot of people to hear is that a lot of Asian varieties of hemp are actually THC dominant. So while a lot of our plants here in Europe have like 2.5% CBD and say 0.1, 0.2 THC, there's Asian varieties that the other way around. They have like 2.5% THC, 0.1% CBD, and they're a big industrial fibrous plant. Now they're not growing for cannabinoid-rich production, but that's cannabinoid content that's in there. And I'm not really sure what we can do further in the. I suppose the terms, as I say, it becomes just like the farmers become comfortable to say we're growing hemp. They know they're filling out a cannabis sativa license, and then we go into the medical issue of the whole sativa indica mess and debate that's going on. So it's yeah. Let's
just call it the solution, Kyle.
It's the solution. It is the solution. New title, that's it.
This is going to be an ongoing discussion around the term of what we call it. But when you want to talk to government, when you want to talk to farmers, when we want to talk to businesses, when we use hemp, they're a lot more open to the discussion than if we start using the word cannabis. So everyone in the hemp industry is in agreement that it is cannabis sativa L. But what you do is you go in, you get the hemp, you get the laws changed, and then you call it cannabis. And then you just go back to calling it cannabis, and they can't stop it. We have to get the low-hanging fruit first, which is recognising that hemp is no longer a controlled substance.
I think.
Hi, I was just wondering. You mentioned Theresa May earlier on, and I was wondering, Theresa May's husband, he grew cannabis or hemp. What was it? He was growing for so many years before he sold his company a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he wasn't actually growing it himself. He was a shareholder or part shareholder. It was British Sugar who were growing cannabis for GW Pharmaceutical, and Theresa May's husband was one of the shareholders in GW Pharmaceutical.
He made billions, didn't he?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Sorry.
He made billions of it. Didn't he?
Overall, I mean, yeah, GW just sold for 5.6 billion a few months ago, so yeah, absolutely all the shareholders have made a lot of money in that.
I think British Sugar shares as well.
Quite hypocritical from a government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's certainly a lot of barriers. I mean, what I would say, to echo sort of some points made by Mike Barnes yesterday, though, I think as much as GW Pharmaceutical have absolutely got a reputation, I don't think there'd be an industry that we'd be discussing. I don't think we'd be here talking today if it wasn't for a lot of the work that GW have done over the last sort of 20 years. They've gone a hard stop route at it. I mean, they've got licensed medicines that are derived from cannabis. That, for anyone that understands that, the medical sector, it is not a straightforward route to be able to get a pharmaceutically authorised licensed medicine that's derived from cannabis, because cannabis has 315 active compounds in any flower, and that's not like most pharmaceutical drugs that have 1 or 2 active compounds, and therefore very easy to, I wouldn't say easy, but a lot easier to put through a double-blind placebo trial and therefore get marketing authorisation for it. Which is why it did take so long for GW to get authorisation for sativa.
Vaccine's quite risky, vaccine's quite risky if they sort of pass, isn't it?
Sam, because sorry, it's just
we've just passed a vaccine. Sorry, we've just passed a vaccine here in about 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a case we're all making. Real world evidence really needs to be looked at with cannabis, absolutely, and it's a point that we all believe in.
I mean, we are really in a surprise that in the 21st century we're still in a situation where we're having to do a fringe festival. In fact, H.E.M.P, which is the Health and Environment Management Programme, was set up because 8 proposals for hemp in the green zone were rejected by the organisers, and so we thought, well, if they won't accept us, we're going to come to you.
Yeah, we don't need the green zone.
We don't need the green zone. We got beyond the green, and thank goodness, because if anyone's been to the green zone, they'll see what a disaster. It's very depressing in the green zone. At least we're here and we can do it our way, which is always the best way. Who else has that?
Hello. Given the government's involvement, close involvement to GW Pharmaceutical, it's safe to assume that they have some knowledge to do with what the plant can do for us. Also, given that before they sold to Just Pharmaceuticals recently, I think they became the first company to become licensed by the FDA in America. So the one and only CEPM, cannabis-based medicine. Yeah, so I don't know. Like, it feels like we're knocking on the wrong door of the government. They're not stupid. Their aim is not to solve our climate crisis, our plastic pollution.
I think we're almost at the stage, you know, when you've got a friend who's got a beat-up car and they come and they say, I've only spent £400 on my beat-up car, and you go, your car's only worth £400. They say, yeah, I've only got to spend another £200 and it'll be fixed. It's almost like that's where we're at. We're at a beat-up car that's hobbling along that we can't say, and that's what our system is. We just keep throwing more band-aids at trying to fix something that's just far too broken. And what I think this plant will do is it will enable us to say we've got a new system that we can step into, like Uber. Like Uber didn't take on the taxis, it just became so usable and so good. People don't even use the word taxi anymore, they call an Uber. If we can create a system that's so easy to step into, and all of the aspects of the supply chain that we've got these pioneers like making the way, so the next hemp farmers that come through have got an easier road to access, and every time it happens it becomes easier and easier to step into. I think that's, we can't convince them because they don't want to be convinced. It's like the broken car, they're broken, we just have to replace it and create something that works.
I think they know that the car is broken because they broke it, and they know exactly how they broke it. But I see what you're saying, and I respect your positivity.
But that's the worry, actually. The worry is that they're dragging their feet until they have everything ready, and then they're going to bring in new legislation that's going to screw us even more. And unfortunately, we saw that a lot in the United States. And this is why it's really important that we have a grassroots movement that really refuses to accept any legislation that isn't going to benefit local communities, local farmers. Actually, Hemp are doing a talk. At what time is the Hemp talk?
In 1 hour's time.
In an hour's time on Overgrow the Regime, and they will talk about how we need to be growing. We need to have some civil disobedience with the hemp, because actually the reality of it is that when we sit back and say, oh yeah, we reach a point where we're kind of giving them the time and space to put everything in place to say, okay, we'll change legislation, but it's only going to benefit big corporations like GW Pharmaceutical, and we can't allow that to happen. Like I mentioned, People's Plant.
I think the other thing is about what Super said about the words, is we're asking for the wrong thing, we're using the wrong words, we're asking for it to be legalised. And once it's legalised, it doesn't mean that it's accessible, it means you can do it with a licence. But who gives you the licence? How much does it cost? And then, once they legalise it, they'll say, oh, we gave you what you asked for. What we want is decriminalisation, we want it to be recognised as a plan. We don't want it legalised, because that's just another minefield.
Let's be clear that actually hemp is legal. You can legally grow 0.2% THC industrial cannabis sativa L in the field by getting a license from the Drugs and Firearms Department of the Home Office. So the problem is that medicinal cannabis, utilising the leaf and the flower, is illegal at the moment in the UK.
Wonderful, guys. Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause for our panellists. And I think bringing it back, obviously we move around in the narrative, but to bring it back, we do have an incredible tool here to combat climate change, and that is what the government needs to realise.
Thanks to Rebekah, Kyle, Vicky and Jamie for their contributions towards a greater cannabis future. And a huge thanks to Sam Cannon, who made Beyond Green a possibility. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I'll see you next time.